One morning, as the Rebbe of the most spectacular shiur in DRS was finishing off his fresh Dunkin' Donuts, hash brown potatoes, supplied every morning by an extremely generous Talmud in the class, the Rebbe noticed a single white hair amongst his full head of flowing hair. Having just passed Chatzi Yomov, the Rebbe was distraught about the strand of hair, and was so distracted that he couldn't teach the sugya of Lo Yilbash to the class properly. Meanwhile, in Israel, Izzy Hada's sister woke up with an epiphany. She finally decided that her country needs her and was determined to list herself in the Israeli army. As a test to see if she was tough enough to handle the crazy Palestinian atmosphere, Izzy's sister purchased a handgun, a pistol, and decided to temporarily live in the PA territory. What can the rabbi do to help with this situation? Can he pull out the strand of hair so he could look much younger? Can Izzy's sister, a nice moral Orthodox Jew, enlist in the army and protect Israel? And can Izzy's sister, even if allowed, to hold a handgun?
The topic of Lo Yilbash, which starts on Chaf Amud Beis in Makos, and in the context of the Gemara is talking about if a person is allowed to take out a piece of hair from his head on Shabbos. So, Ben, would you like to read?
The Gemara begins, Tani Nami Hachi, the Brisa says similarly, Hanoto Male Pi Zug b'Shabbos, somebody who takes out a scissor tip full of hair on Shabbos, Chayev, he's Chayev. V'kam Male Pi Zug, how much is this scissor tip full? Shtayim, two strands of hair. Rabbi Lezer Omer, Rabbi Lezer says, Achad, is only one strand of hair. Modim Chacham L'Divri Rabbi Lezer, Memilkat Levanos Mitocha Shechoros, Afilu Echad Shu Chayev. So the Chacham agreed to Rabbi Lezer in the case of taking white hairs out from black hairs, that even taking one of these white hairs out is chayiv. V'davar zeh afilu b'chol aser, and even on chol, this action is aser. Mishum shnemar lo yuvash yavar simlas isha, because it says that a man should not wear the clothing of a woman.
Oh, okay. So now Rashi, Amar Rashi HaKadosh in Devrei Maskil b'Malakit, Sa'aros levanos mitoch shchoros, that when a person releases or takes out a strand of hair from his head, the kivan da adam makvid aseir lavan achad shebein sa'aros shchoros kadei shelo yira zaken. The fact that a person is taking it out of his head in order to look pretty or look younger, Amrin de Kishu Malakit Osomi Bein Shchoros, Malacha Chashuva Hilo, that it's really a Malacha Chashuva. V'chayev mishum gozes, and it's chayev mishum gozes for malacha. Kiven dechayesh legazuzazu. Okay, and now the next divrei maska of Rashi, af b'chol aser. Why is it aser and b'chol? Shemisna atzma benuye isha. That it's really the acts of a woman. The fact that someone will get pleasure out of making himself look better and younger and more embellished.
So according to Rashi, there's one reason why it's aser on Shabbos, which is because of gozes, one of the 39 malachot. And on Chol, you're also because of what the pasuk says.
Okay, so now we go to the Gemara in Nazir, Daf Nun Ted Amud Aleph, and now we are again going into the discussion of the context of what Lo Yilabesh is, Derabanan and Deraisa. Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hamavir Beis Hashech Beis Arve Loke Mishram Lo Yilabesh Gever Simlas Isha. So Rabbi Chia says that a person that removes a strand of hair from his armpit or from his pubic region gets loken. Why? Because of the pasuk Lo Yilabesh Gever Simlas Isha, which implies that Rabbi Chia holds it's deraisa. Now the Gemara asks Meisvei, Havarta Seir Eina Midivrei Torah Ela Midivrei Sofrim. There's a brisa that says the fact that when a person pulls a strand out of his armpit or his head or his pubic region is not an Isser Deraisa, it's an Isser Derabanan, which is again a question on Rav Chia, who uses the pasuk to explain the Isser. So now we answer and say, the Amar Ki Hai Tana, that Rav Chia holds like this Tana. The Tanya, he brings another brisa. Hamavdir Beisa Shechi Ubeisa Arve Hareze Over Mishum Lo Yilabesh Gever Simlas Isha, which sounds exactly like Rabbi Chia, who uses the pasuk to say that it's an isser to pull a strand of hair out of your armpit or your pubic region because of the pasuk Lo Yilabesh. Vitana Kama, and the person that says it's Midivrei Sofrim, what does he do? Vitana Kama, Hi Lo Yilabesh Gever, my Darshbe. How does he darshan? What does he darshan from it? So we answer, Mi Bayile. we need this. We need another Tana. Look at the Tanya from the Brisa. Lo yiya kliya gever al isha. My Taman Lomar. What's the Tana Kama gonna say with the pasuk of Lo yiya kli gever isha, which means that a woman should not dress like a man? We answer Im shelo yilabesh is simlas isha. The isha simlas ish. Hare kvar namar toevahu. If a man dresses like a woman or a woman dresses like a man, it's a toeva. So the Gemara kind of goes and continues and says, why is it a toeva? A toeva is an abomination. A man who dresses like a woman or a woman who dresses like a man, is that an abomination? Is that something that's such a disgrace that you are going to basically say you are an abomination to Hashem and all that's created from Him? So the Gemara also understands this and says no. Ve'ein kan toeva ela shelo yilabesh is simlas isha ve'yeshe ben hanashim ve'isha simlas ish ve'teshe ben ha'anashim. The toeva is not coming from the actual levusha or the getting dressed. The toeva is coming from getting dressed and going and hanging out with the opposite sex. If a man dresses like a woman and goes hang out with women, that's the toeva. So now there are a few things to discuss. Ben, just go on to the Gemara.
Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says, how do we know that a woman should not go out in the dressed as in the clothing for war? The same pasuk that we mentioned beforehand, that a man should not go out in the dressing as a woman, and so too a woman should not be dressed in the clothing of a man. That a man should not put on the clothing of a woman.
Good. Okay, so now there are a few things to discuss. One is a question that we can have from the Gemara in Makos. The Gemara in Makos, according to Rashi, states that there's an Isser to take out a strand of hair on Shabbos.
There's a difference between the Isser on Shabbos and the Isser on Chol.
Why? Because Rashi basically goes into the Isser of Gozes on Shabbos. But the fact is, if something is Asr B'chol because of Lo Yilabesh,
why is it not Asr on Shabbos?
Why is it not? Exactly. So the answers are twofold, and it's brought up by the Meiri and the Aruch LaNer. The answer is, according to, there's two opinions, according to which one holds Derabanan and which one holds Deraisa. The opinion that holds that Lo Yilabesh is Derabanan would say that a Derabanan of Lo Yilabesh for Bechol and a Gozes or a Malacha on Shabbos, Malacha is going to win. So that's why Rashi embellishes on the fact that it's going to be Lo Gozes because it's Deraisa over Derabanan. The opinion that says something is Deraisa, or Lo Yilabesh is Deraisa, from just the Levusha, that answer is, you could have chosen Rashi picked Lo Gozes, Gozes in the Gemara.
Because it's obvious that we know.
Embellish upon. So I guess the answer, the question is better than the answer for that part, but
because it's obvious that we know that you're Asr on Shabbos because of the same reason you're Asr on Chol.
Exactly. The next thing to embellish on is what are the opinions going on? What is the parameters of the opinion? So let's go through the Gemara one just outside once. Okay. Reb Chia holds that there is a pasuk of Lo Yilabesh to usher a single strand of hair being pulled out of your armpit. Okay, Lo Yilabesh. That means that it's going on one single action. The levusha, the action of a person beautifying himself
through clothing
or an action of a woman is deraisa. It's an issa deraisa. However, what's the next opinion? The next opinion is not medayag on Lo Yilabesh. They focus on toeva. The fact is that a person who dresses like a woman, or a man who dresses like a woman, or a woman who dresses like a man, it's not an abomination. It's not the actual isser mid'araisa. The isser mid'araisa comes from the toeva.
The actual actions of being
exactly. Like it's a cause and effect. So in essence, there are two pu'ulos, two actions that causes the second opinion to say it's de'araisa. Okay.
The action of actually dressing, and what leads after to the dressing,
which is the toeva, which is the abomination. Okay. So that means that lo silbash or lo yilabesh, according to the second opinion that holds toeva as deraisa, would say that just lo silbash, just the levusha, is derabanan. Okay, and now the last thing to say is from here on out, lo yilabesh, just to be medayag on the actual word, is clothing. It's talking about clothing. A person should not wear the clothing of the opposite sex. I want to say, or we have to say that from here on out, we are really discussing the opinion that says lo yalabesh is applying to not only clothing but other things. For example,
Actual actions of pulling
actual actions of pulling a
like what
hair
the
in your
Gemara
head,
says.
and all tikkune isha of basically acting like a woman or the opposite sex. Just to note, the opinion of the Tanna Kama in Masechtas Nazir only applies to begadim. However, Ben and I, along with many other Mefarshim, would like to extend the Tanna Kama's pshat of the fact that there are two aspects to the Isser into other cases aside from begadim. That means that in the other cases, when we say they hold like the Tanna Kama, it doesn't. It means that they're actually holding the fact that there are two aspects of the full Ikra Isser of Lo Yobash, which are the Levusha plus the Toeva.
In Devarim Perikov Bet Pasuk Hey, he uses the same word to Eva in talking about the same pasuk that we were saying beforehand. The pasuk says, "Lo yehei kli gever al isha, v'lo yilabish gever simas isha, ki tovat Hashem lokecha kol osa'ila." That anybody who does this action of changing the dress is doing about an abomination in front of Hashem. And here Onkelos translates abomination to be Ari Merache Kadma Hashem. You're separating yourself from Hashem.
So not exactly an abomination, but it's something that's doing something bad.
Right. But which is interesting that if you look in Vayikra Perak Yudchet Pasuk Chafbet, that when a person is doing an actual action, Onkelos uses the word toeva. We'll see. Ves zachar lo tishkav mishkav isha toeva hi. That a person by mishkav zachar, a person who's a male, is not allowed to lay with a male the same way he would lay with a woman, because it's toeva, abomination in front of Hashem. And then Onkelos translates it as toeva ta hi. That it's also a toeva in front of Hashem. That over here, when you're doing an action, it's a toeva, but by clothing, it's only a separation, because it's not such a bad thing just to dress up and in the dress of the other gender.
So what might be the differences between the two translations? Okay, how I see it, or how we should see it, is that it's two differences. One is the fact that by mishkav zachar, which is chayev misa, right? Onkelos will explain it as a toeva. Why? Because it's an abomination. Hashem gave us women and not men, and it's an unnatural thing. It's an abomination. It's a disgrace to Hashem. However, but by lo yalabesh, it's not exactly a disgrace like we saw in our Gemara. Okay, so you can't really say that it's on the same level of abomination or a disgrace as mishkav zachar, and therefore they might have different punishments. That's why mishkav zachar might be chayim misa, and that's why lo yalabesh is not. It's just malchus. Okay, the next difference in the fact that Onkelos translates toeva in our pasuk at Devarim are merakek as removing yourself from Hashem, because he doesn't believe it's a true abomination, which might go by our opinion in Gemara's Nazir that says that lo yalabesh is really derabanan. Okay, the fact that he says lo yalabesh is derabanan, what do we say? That the Isser Deoraisa of Lo Yalabesh comes to two pu'ulos, two actions. One is the levusha, and the other is the toeva, the actual putting yourself in the position of hanging out with the opposite sex, with the clothing. Okay.
Right.
So right, exactly.
Now we're going to see in Rashi, is it really such a big? Is the reason because of clothing, or is it because of something else? So divrei maskal lo yehei kli gever al isha shedehei dumya liisha kidei shetalich ben hanashim. That the first thing firstly Rashi says that you're doing this because you want to walk with men, with the men. She'ein zu ella l'shem niyot. That you're only doing this because of znus. That the only reason that this is usher is because of znus. And then also Rashi repeats himself in Rashi divrei maskal kito avad. He says lo asra tola ella levush maybe l'dei toeva, that you're only coming to do this because of znus toeva. And then it's interesting to see that then the Rashbam sees it a little bit differently. He sees it. He says like this: the same divrei maskal lo yehei kli gever al isha. He says lechat bein ha'anashim, that the first iser is to walk in the ways and with men, and then it's going to lead to znus. That it's two different things, as opposed to Rashi, who says she'ein zu ella l'shem znus.
Right. So in essence, the fact is the Rashbam and the Rashi both agree that the end result in the Aver, the Isser, is the promiscuity. but Rashi holds it's inevitable,
Right.
promiscuity. However, the Rashbam holds that it's really separate.
Right, because you can have the first thing of lalecha bein hanashim,
Right.
and it could happen that's
It
nus.
could not be znus.
Right.
Right. Now, we found the scriptural source for Lo Yalabe, so now we also went through the Talmudic source, the Gemara source, and now we're going to go through the Rambam.
The Rambam in Hilchot Avodos Chachamim in Perak Yud Bet Halacha Yud says, Lo Yaid Ish Ade Isha, and a man should not dress in the way of a woman. Kiyon Shilabish Bigdei Tzivoniim Bechali Zahav, in the way of dressing with colored clothing, or with bracelets. Makom She'ein Levushin Oto Akalim. And in a place where only women will dress in a certain way, a man would be ushered to do it in a way, in an area that a woman does, even something that a man does in a different area. In both cases, you would get malchus. Person takes out white hairs from black hairs, from his head or from his beard. Even if one person only takes one hair out, he'll get malchus. Because what he's doing is he's acting in the way of a woman. And also in a case where a person would dye his hair black, and even if he's only coloring one hair, he gets malchus.
Okay, so the bottom lines of this Rambam is, one, that the action of being like a woman or a woman being like a man is only dependent on the Bedina itself, and the actual action is the beautification. It's going on the actual levusha of the person, which means that the Rambam extends his lokin iser, his lokin punishment, to one hair, because no matter what, it's still a person trying to beautify himself.
The Ravid says, Amar Avram, lo machar shehei loka achas shelo amru ela aser. And it doesn't make any sense that why would the Rambam say that you would get you get malchus for one? Really, it's only an iser. V'od, and furthermore, he's going to say something wrong with the Rambam. V'od mai ade isha ika bichad. What does it mean that you're doing something in the way of a woman only with one hair? So the Ravid says v'hagol minchra milsa habichlal. So in a case when it's not recognizable at all, you're not doing any iser. But if you take your whole hair that's all white and make it black, then something recognizable, which would be usher according to the Ravid.
Right. So the bottom line of the Ravid is
that it has to be something that's recognizable in order to be an usher. You're doing a recognizable act that's pushing you towards the gender of the woman, which would be usher.
Right. So it's more than the Rambam. Not only the ikr of the isser. The ikr of the isser is the fact that the person is doing the action that's noticeable by others, not the actual beautification of the person itself. Okay. So the Kesef Mishnah asks on the Ravid, from the text of our Gemara Makos, he says, Lo yesh litmoa da'chazina beGemara da'al afilu achas kamar v'davar zeh afilu b'chol asher mishum shenemar lo yilavish kever. From the fact that our Gemara says, even by one strand, it's usher to take a strand out of your hair. It's asking the Ravid, how could the Ravid say no logan? So the Kesef Mishnah essentially answers and says the Haravid sover the yesh lefarish kisha amru v'davar zeh afilu b'chol asher amalakit levanos b'toch shkoros kai. He has a different explanation of what those words mean than what the Kesef Mishnah is asking. Lo ala filu achas, not calling on one. Bekach pirish devarav lo michvar shehiloka be'emet be'achas shlo amru ella isser, that it didn't say, that it only said isser v'lo amru chayav, and it didn't say chayav, so it has nothing to do with logan. So, wait, let's examine this question of the Kesef Mishnah a little further. The fact is, the Kesef Mishnah, this is what the question answer was. How could the Ravid say there was no lokin by one strand of hair? If in our Gemara it said aser, okay? And then Kesef Mishnah answers, wait, in our Gemara it said aser and not chayiv. The question doesn't add up. The Kesef Mishnah's question literally is answered pashut in the text of the Ravid. So what's he actually asking? So the answer to this, the explanation to what the Kesef Mishnah's question might be, the difference in the medai, in the what the inferences that the Rambam and the Ravid each make for their opinion. For the Kesef Mishnah's question is saying this: how could the Ravid say that? How could the Ravid say that there's no lokin by one strand of hair. If in our Gemara it said it's usher, and this is like what the Rambam would explain our Gemara is that the fact that our Gemara didn't make a distinction between one hair and two hairs. So even though it said usher, the Rambam in the Kesef Mishnah in his question would say that usher implies chayiv. That usher, even by one strand of hair, implies that you get lokin. So that's the question of the Kesef Mishnah. The question of the Kesef Mishnah is saying, wait a minute, how could the Ravid, it says in our Gemara, there's no distinction between one hair and two hairs. It says usher, which implies that it's chayiv. How could the Ravid say that? But he answers and said, the Ravid is medayik on the fact that it didn't say usher. The Ravid says that there is actually a difference between one and two hairs. Two hairs is a given, it's lokin. But the fact that the Gemara didn't make a distinction and just said usher by one hair, that's what the Ravid is going on. And that's why he doesn't say lokin by one hair. So, going back to the differences between the Ravid and the Rambam.
Right, the Ravid says that anything that's recognizable, that's why he says it's usher by two hairs, and by one hair, and you get malchus by two. The Rambam says it's only a din levusha, and din making yourself look like a woman. So we have two nafkaminas in between these two different opinions. One nafkamina would be the nafkamina that the Rambam and the Ravid were dealing with, which is taking out one single strand. The Rambam would say that taking out one single strand is already doing an action of a woman, so it would be chayiv for that. The Ravid would say it's not, like we said before, it's not recognizable.
So it's just usher.
Right. The second nafkamina would be a case where you would be shaving your armpits for swimming. If you're shaving your armpits for swimming, it is recognizable, and you're not doing any action like a woman. So the Rambam would say it's not a problem. And the Ravid would say that it is a problem because you're recognizable to all the other people around you that you shaved your armpits.
So the difference between not a problem and a problem in this case, interestingly enough, is not mutter or usher, it's really usher and chayiv. So the Rambam in this case would only say usher, while the Ravid in this case would say you're chayiv malchus. Right? And that's the difference between these two nafkaminos. It's not...
Right. When we say it's not a problem, we really mean it's only an isser, but you don't get malchus.
Right.
But when we say it is a problem, it's malchus and not an isser.
It's how bad the isser is. Okay, so now that we did the Rambam, and we went through a few sources in the Rambam, like the Ravid, we're going to go to the Shulchan Aruch.
In Shulchan Aruch Yordea Halachos Lo Yilbash Gever says, Maver Seir Beis Hashachi Beis Ha'erva, a person who cuts his armpits or his pubic area, Afilu B'Misparim Kein Tori, even with a razor, Hayu Makanos So Makas Mardos. We give him Makos Mardos, which are Makos Derabanan.
Right, so the actual act of levusha is what? Derabanan. That's according to Shulchan Aruch.
With what are these dealing with? The Malcolm Shein Mavirin also Elanashim. He's only doing this in a case where this would be an action of a woman. Because that way, if he's getting Malchus Derabanan, because what he's doing is he's acting like a woman.
So what about in a case where someone would dye their hair from black to white, not white to black?
So in that case, it wouldn't be a problem.
Why?
Because he's not doing a case of anything that a woman would do.
Right. Okay, so then we go to the...
But in a case where a woman would do the same type of thing that this man is trying to do, it wouldn't be an isser.
Right. Okay, so here we see that the Shulchan Aruch kind of holds like what we saw with the Ravid before, that he might hold that just levusha is derabanan, and the levusha plus the toeva, which he didn't really mention here, was the araisa. Okay, so let's go back and see a few. Let's make a little bit of a review. We saw in the Gemara, right, that there was an opinion of the Tanakama that said that the levusha plus the toeva is the araisa, but just levusha is derabanan. But he only extended it to begadim. We also now we're taking it. And then we saw the Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov, who said that the levusha itself is deraisa. Okay, so extending the Tanakhama's pshat past begadim, and extending it to the Ravid and the Shulchan Aruch and other opinions. Okay, there are a few nafkaminas between what is deraisa, but between the levusha itself, which is argued between being deraisa or derabanan. For example, there was a case in Shilas and Shuvah Shaul Umeshiv, who said that of a man who asked the Rebbe, who was very, very distraught and distracted about white hairs growing from his beard. And the fact is that he wanted to dye his hair or pluck his hair out of his head, pluck the white hairs out of his beard, because he would lose his job and he would be very
So in
miserable,
that case,
or something would happen.
But he's not doing it for beautifying himself.
He's doing it to beautify himself, but the fact is, what's the difference?
He's not doing it to be like a woman.
It's the difference between Derabanan and Deraisa. Would you give a heter for Deraisa just because he's a little bit stressed? But the fact is that the Rebbe who was asked gave him a heter. Why? Because it was Derabanan, in fact. Okay, so there might be a heter that would, there might be a heter for the factor Levusha because of the Derabanan, not the Deraisa factor. Okay, so now that we've discussed many of the parameters of Lo Yobash, we want to go into a practical application that has caused a lot of controversy in Israel, women going to war.
So we found the Mishnah in Sota talking about the obligations of people to go to war. The Mishnah in Sota, Mishnah Zayin says, what are we dealing with going to a war? The Milchamas Rishus. That it's a Milchamas Rishus, but above Milchamas Mitzvah, but for Milchamas Mitzvah, everybody goes out. Even a chassan from his room and a kala from under the chuppah,
which is now including women.
Right. Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yehuda gives an alternative understanding. Rabbi Yehuda says that it's dealing with Milchamas Mitzvah. Okay. So there's a machlokas in the Mishnah between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. One says that it's the obligation of everybody to go out is during a Milchamas Rishus, and one says the obligation of everybody to go out is during Milchamas Chova.
Okay, and there are many opinions that say that they're not really arguing about what kind of war; they're really arguing about what the war is actually called.
So we found in the Ma'or, which is a halachic journal, an article about women going to war. It says, we learned in Second Sanhedrin, in Matzil Milcham Reshut Ela Al Pi Beis Din Shashim Ve'echad. You don't go out to war unless the Beis Din Shashim Ve'echad says that you're allowed to go out. Here's Rashi. Rashi says, Milchamas Rishus. What is Milchamas Rishus? Kol Malacha Kuri Rishus Levad Milchamas Yoshua Shahaisel Kovash Eretz Yisrael. Every war is a war of Milchamas Rishus, except the war that during the times of Yeshua, which were needed in order to conquer Eretz Yisrael. Ubesota Memdal Bet says, we learned in the Mishnah. The same Mishnah we just read. And Ram says, Hey, halacha aleph, ezehi melchames mitzvah. What is melchames mitzvah? Zu melchames shivim umos melchames Amalek. This is the war of 70 nations and Amalek. And you have to protect the borders of Eretz Yisrael. And afterwards you have melchames rishus. And this is the melchama that you're going to have with the rest of the nations. And you're going to have this Milchamas Rishus in order to make the borders bigger and to strengthen Eretz Yisrael. And then continues in the article later on. It says Milchama Azos Tihi Tamid Milchamas Mitzvah. And then later it says that any type of this Milchama that's coming to strengthen the Gvul of Eretz Yisrael is a Milchamas Mitzvah. The Hilchach therefore Shels Yisrael Leskaber Chayilim Anashim Vinashim, and therefore it's the chiyuv of the Mashdalas Yisrael, the Rosh Hashanah, to gather up all the chaylim, even women and children. Well, women and men.
Good. Okay, but now let's go back to the Rambam. What was the Rambam? The Rambam was quoted that basically all wars, or many wars, for defense for Israel, to expand Israel is a Milchamas Mitzvah, which we said in the Mishnah was obligation, which means it includes women. But that means that women should also go to war. And it says in a different place in Halacha, in Hilchas Avodah Zarah, Perek Beis Halacha Yud, Lo Teda Isha Ada Ish, Kagon Shetashim Baroshim Mitzavnas Okoveya. A woman should not be like a man. She shouldn't put a hat on her head or a turban on her head. O Shilabesh Shirion Ukiyotsebo. And she should not wear armor. Okay, so now there's a steer in the Rambam. How could the Rambam say that women should be obligated in war and all Milchamas Mitzvah? However, he says that that women should not go wear armor. So the answer to this stira might be answered by the Rashash, the Radvaz, and other Mefarshim that had a problem with the Rambam even implying that women should go to war. And they say that Rambam didn't imply that they should go to war. Obviously, you said that they should leave their chambers with the Mechametz mitzvah, like they said in the Mishnah. However, they do stress that Rambam was really talking about women doing actual womanly duties. For example,
Bringing out water to the front line.
cooking, and doing anything that a woman is really supposed to do at home. Because the Ibn Ezra actually just states that a woman cannot go to war. Why? Because she's not obligated. I mean, she's not created in order to go to war. She's actually she's supposed to do the activities of the household, taking care of the children, doing the cooking, and going to war and being in that kind of environment would lead to znus, which has also been the backbone, or that mindset has been the backbone for why so many Rebbeim, an overwhelming amount of Rebbeim, who've been against the idea of a draft for women in Israel. For example, the Chazon Ish, the Techevener Rebbe, the Brisker Rav, all say that even the notion of drafting women in the army, if a woman, the idea of it is disgusting. It's a toeva, it's an isser, and it's disgusting how Israel is even trying to think about obligating people to do an isser mid'oraisa, because as it says, right, that in our Gemara and Nazir, that even Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says that it's from where do we know that a woman should not go to war? Because of what? Because of lo yalabesh. And the fact is that if there was actually a time where there would be a draft for women in war, many of the Rebbeim in Israel, including the Chazon Ish, say that it's actually Yar Yavor, that you should actually, unto death, refuse to be drafted into the army. So really, in conclusion, there's an overwhelming amount of people that say that that women going to war is not an option because of, one, the Isser Minat Torah for Lo Yalabesh, two, the immorality and the znus that it will lead to, and three, the fact that they're not really meant for a war environment. Not even men, as it said in the Shabbos in Samach Daled Amud Aleph, where the men tried after their victory, the men tried to ask Moshe for a kapara, and Moshe asked, "Wait a minute, why are you asking me? We won." They said, "You know what? We don't want to be negatively impacted by the war psychologically. It's just such a negative impact." Okay, and even Rav Moshe Feinstein implies in his tshuva for allowing women to hold pistols in the settlements. Even he implies that war is not a place for women and they should not be obligated. Ben?
So we're going to go into a little bit of we're going to go into the topic of pistols. There's in Geras Moshe a tshuva from Moshe that says im yesh lahatir gam lenashim shemitzad itzer halav k'dei the kli geber al isha aser lehem lisha kli neshek. If women are just doing this in order to act like men, it is also for them to carry a woman, to carry a weapon. Dam Rav Elazar ben Yaakov in Azar Daf Nuntet, like Rav Elazar ben Yaakov said on Daf Nuntet. Lisha kli neshek kata nikra ektach. But in a case where a woman is going to wear a pistol, mefarish, the malkum deika chashash pikuach nefesh pshita shemuter. In any case that is going to be pikuach nefesh, it's going to be mutter.
So there's a heter for pikuach nefesh, and then the Rav Moshe is going to bring 4 other heterim for women wearing a pistol in the settlements. For example, he says kasav. Shabbataz, Kasav, Derech, Nivoy, Bekashat Aser. When you're decorating yourself and you're making yourself look better, it's Aser. Aval, Im, Osekein, Bibnei Hacham, Vahatzina, Vageshamim, Leka Iser. So if you're doing it for some other reason besides decorating yourself, then you're fine. The next heter is Kasav Ashach, B'Shem Abach, Ukli Neshek, Ze Eino Klau, Derech Kashut. A little pistol, kasher v'navi. A little pistol is not going for, again, decoration. Ela lahagen al atzman. It's really to protect yourself. V'gam she'ein b'zeh inyan yitzil l'melchama de'ein kan inyan melchama shehu tzibor ela she'osos l'mikra ve'alma k'shenosos b'derech. The next heter is the fact that it's not really an action of melchama. It's really you're just going and you're occasionally going with war, and the fact that you're not doing an action of war is a heter. V'gam she'ein derech hatzava b'milchama b'kli neshek katan kizeh ela b'kli neshek gedolim. And the other heter, the last heter, is the fact that it's a handgun, it's not a machine gun that's big, and it's also an action of war. But also Ramosha goes on to say, listen, you should use these heterim sensitively and within reason, because it's not really the best thing for women to do, just for pikuach nefesh. And also, I just want to stress that he does imply that war is not the place for women, and war is really technically usher for women, because two of his heterim, the backbone of the fact is the fact that these women are not going to war. So that's why it's heter. Right. But it implies that if they were doing b'derech milchama, it would have been usher.
Right.
Okay?
And Tzitz Eliezer says that it's 100% usher for a woman to carry any type of gun.
But he doesn't give any reasoning to it. He just says it's usher and it's toeva, and the fact that, and he doesn't address any of the heterim. So really, bottom line is that Eliezer says no pistols, and it didn't offer any solutions to it. And Rav Moshe says yes because of 5 heterim, and the overwhelming majority say women should not go. We discussed a few questions in our scenario. And we thought it would be a great review if we went over the answers to the questions, because
Right. So the first question was, what can Rabbi do to help the situation? Can he pull out the strand of hair?
So there are a few factors we have to take into account. One is the fact that he was very distracted, and it was really
right. Doraisa versus the Rabbanan.
So right, the fact that he was very distracted could go between our naftamina of the heterim that we went over in the Doraisa and the Rabbanan, and the Sholem Lumeshiv case of the fact that the guy was able to dye his hair and his beard black,
or pluck them out,
because of the fact that it was derabanan, and also the fact that it's one single strand of hair. So according to the Ravid, it would say that one strand of hair would be okay, and according to the Rambam, it wouldn't be okay.
Right. The second question is, can Izzy's sister, a nice moral Orthodox Jew, enlist into the army? So really, what this comes down to is whether or not she has a chiyuv to go to the army from the government. If she had a chiyuv to go to the army, then she can't do anything about it. She has to go. But if the government would give her a option whether to do a national service or to do something else that would be in place of the army, then she really should, because there's an overwhelming majority of Rabbanan that say that the army is a place of znus and a place that's not conducive for an Orthodox Jew.
Right. Even the Chazon Ish says that if the Memshalah, did force them, they should even go Yar Yavor. Okay.
And the third question is Izzy's sister even allowed to hold a handgun? So we saw that the only case that she would be allowed to hold a handgun is a pikuach nefesh case, like Igeris Moshe said. But in any other case, then she would not be allowed to hold a gun.